Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Auld, Heids. Although it's not evening for you now, it's Sunday morning, but we'll record this on Friday night. With Mike Fennick, myself, and our special guest, Alec Neil. We've been trying to get Alec on for a wee while, ever since we saw the what we call the Alec's Manifesto, which appeared a couple of weeks ago. And we're glad to have him on. Over to you, Mike.
Alec, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure.
I saw what you and Alex Salmon had put together, and I thought at last someone's starting to address the issues that need to be addressed. One of the things that I keep raising in the programs Dave and I do is that we're not prepared well enough. So big compliments to the two of you. It's exactly what was needed, and I hope during this discussion you can maybe flesh out some of the things that are involved. But Mr. Llewellyn wants to start from a different direction. So, Dave, over to you.
Aye. Basically, I've noticed that you've been quite vocal over the last wee while about the parliamentary inquiry. As we've all sat and watched it, it's basically it's turning into a complete farce as documents aren't handed in, and some people aren't allowed to give evidence and some people are, and then civil servants aren't allowed under the Civil Service Code, and then the head civil servant gives evidence twice after she does the wrong evidence once. And so then we saw you coming out with an idea that you put it all in front of a judge who's got access to all the papers and can sort it out. Would you like to tell us a bit about that, Alec?
Yeah, well, first of all, I have to say I haven't lost any confidence in the parliamentary inquiry, because I do think at the end of the day, a lot of this stuff will have to be published. It will have to come out, because quite frankly, when you set up a parliamentary inquiry and you promise to give it all the information it requires or requests, then I think at the end of the day, the parliamentary inquiry has been worthwhile, will continue to be worthwhile, and I look forward to completing its work. Now, it's doing something very different from what I'm suggesting in terms of a judicial inquiry. The remit of the parliamentary inquiry is to look at the Scottish Government's harassment procedures, how they were applied in the Alex Salmon case, and what lessons can be learned for the future. And I think that's a very, very worthwhile piece of work. But what I'm suggesting is in relation to the allegation made by Alex Salmon, and I don't know if it's right or wrong, but what I'm saying is, coming from a former First Minister, when he says there was a conspiracy to do him in, and that involved elements of the organs of the state, such as the Civil Service and the Crown Office, then that merits proper investigation. And I believe that that investigation into that allegation should be led by a judge, and that judge should have the power to get all the paperwork and all the information and interview all the people he or she decides to do so, to get to the bottom of this. Because I think it's quite clear from some of the evidence given in the parliamentary inquiry, it certainly looks as though there is at least a prima facie case that there was some kind of conspiracy of some kind, by whom we don't know, when we don't know, but certainly if this was all as a result of, accident, it would be quite a tall story to believe, particularly when you have 4 senior civil servants having to go back to the committee to correct their statements to the committee made under oath. It does not fill you full of confidence. So I think a judge-led inquiry into the allegation of a conspiracy is absolutely required. I don't want to live in a country where any individual, whether it's Alex Salmon, a former First Minister, or anyone else, can become the subject of a coordinated activity at state level. That's not the kind of society Scotland is or should be. And if there is any substance to these allegations, then it has to be rooted out and the people responsible brought to justice.
Alec, this is a thing that I've been asked to be an expert witness in court on a number of occasions, so I've got a particular way of thinking about these things.
Yeah.
This will sound a bit like watching Columbo, you know, where the perfect crime, you watch it going on and it's all there and he's never going to be, or she's never going to get caught. Me Too arose, I understand that. So there is a valid argument, I think, for saying, well, we need to look at procedures. But here's where I get out of step with everything that went on. There are only two categories after everyone that was involved, the civil service, internal lawyers, external lawyers, memos going backwards and forwards. Category one is where the former minister was a member of a political party which is in power at that time. That's category one under the procedure. Category two is where the former minister was a member of a previous government of a previous party. But there's no third category. Now, Andy Whiteman, I don't think has been a minister in government, but can I use him as the example? I'm not accruing anything to him. But if Andy Whiteman had been a minister, he's now independent. There is no category for how you deal with harassment or abuse for that category. Now, I sit down and look at that and say, well, there's two things come out at me. Either everyone and the money involved reached a conclusion, which in my opinion is completely incompetent because you're missing a category. Or two, there was a conspiracy. It's the only other conclusion. You sit down and say, well, we're going after former ministers, and you target those two categories, and you never ever complete the task. I say that as a Columbo. I've got one more question. Which was it? Incompetence by everyone or a conspiracy?
Well, from what's emerged is that the ministerial code quite rightly was reviewed to take account of the issues that had arisen in the Me Too movement. And there was certainly allegations made in the Parliament itself about sexual harassment and activity. In fact, we've just this week passed a bill in the Parliament, or processed a bill in the Parliament to deal with some of these issues. So I think actually carrying out a review of the ministerial code and to take account of what was required in terms of protection for people against sexual harassment, I think that bit's perfectly fair. I think where things perhaps went wrong in terms of the ministerial code was making it retrospective, and that being retrospective to former ministers. Now, you probably know that the UK civil service expressed some serious doubts about introducing the principle of making it retrospective. And of course, I'm not a lawyer, but any action against someone for retrospective codes is of dubious legality, I am told by my legal friends. I mean, if you take the death penalty, if you made the death penalty retrospective to when it was abolished, and everybody who's committed murder since then could be hung, then I'm very sure that the human rights courts would have something to say about that. I mean, you cannot, people can't be held by rules that were written or rewritten after the event. And furthermore, if you make it retrospective to people who've retired from ministerial office and no longer hold ministerial office, and in Alex Salmond's case, no longer was a parliamentarian at all, then what is the sanction under the ministerial code? There is no sanction, because you can be sanctioned if you're an existing minister. In the extreme case, you could be fired as a minister. But any other issue is really out with the remit, possible remit of a ministerial code. If somebody has been found guilty of sexual harassment or worse, then that's a criminal matter, but that can be dealt with under the criminal law anyway. It doesn't matter whether they were a minister, an ex-minister, or whatever. You know, everybody is subject to the criminal code. So this idea of making it retrospective, and then again, how far back do you go? Because theoretically, you could go way back to 1999. Yep. So I never understood why it was made retrospective. I don't think that was relevant for the reasons you outline. You have no sanction against these people under the ministerial code. You have sanction If it's a serious enough offence to report to the police, and then the police investigate, and if they find that there's a case, then they refer that to the public prosecutors. But that's not the role of the ministerial code. So I think that was a mistake in making it retrospective. And of course, it's one of the reasons, and one of the reasons given in court, accepted by the judge as part of the judicial review between Alec and the civil service, the Scottish Government. It was one of the reasons why the case fell apart when it came to the judicial review.
So you mentioned the Crown Office in passing earlier on. You've also got the report of what's happened to the two people from Duff & Phelps at Rangers.
Yeah.
And the fact that they've just been awarded millions of pounds. There seems to me to be something very worrying about all of that, because the public are being asked to pay or to fund the payments for that Duff & Phelps thing. It was all done without probable cause. I mean, that's horrific from a Crown Office without probable cause, and it was seen to be malicious. And yet, when we're dealing with the inquiry, I want to bring that back in. The public are not being entitled through the inquiry to see what actually happened. That just strikes me as wrong.
Absolutely. I mean, we're in an incredible position where the Crown Office are refusing to make the paperwork available from the criminal trial that's relevant to the parliamentary inquiry's remit, not about revealing who the complainants were or anything like that, because clearly their rights have to be fully protected. But the Crown Office is actually threatened, my understanding is, Alex Salmond and his lawyers with criminal action if they even tell the committee what paperwork they should ask for. Yeah. I mean, that's the kind of stuff you expect in Russia or in Belarus, not in Scotland. And I think there has to be big question marks about the role of the Crown Office in all of this, even if it wasn't a conspiracy. It is illiberal, to say the least, that a parliamentary committee is denied the paperwork it was promised it would get from the First Minister. And the Crown Office are saying no, but not only saying no, actually threatening Alex Salmond and his lawyers with legal action if they give that paperwork to the committee, or if they even tell the committee what the paperwork covers, the titles, of the documents that they should be asking for. I think the Crown Office has got a lot to answer for. And you begin to ask the question, is the Crown Office acting in the name of justice, or is it acting politically? And on this, it seems to me as though it's acting politically, not in terms of defending and promoting justice. And I think a root and branch review of the Crown Office is required, given not just this case and not just the Rangers case, but for example, I've been arguing for years about individual cases I represent, women I represent, who have been the subject of very serious abuse. And the inactivity I found of the prosecutors has been absolutely unacceptable. I personally do not think the Crown Office is fully fit for purpose. And not only do questions need to be asked, but quite frankly, they have to be brought to book, and they need to allow the parliamentary committee to get access to all the documentation that it has asked for and deserves and been promised.
See, when you're saying the thing about the paperwork there, we had Craig Murray on a couple of weeks ago, and he said that he knows of the paperwork, he's seen the paperwork, but he has asked them for it because he wants to use it for his defence, and they will not give him it, even though they admit that they have it. It's utter nonsense, because I mean, basically, if you're charged with a criminal offence, you're entitled to ask for the papers for your defence, and they're saying yes, we've got to, but no, you can't have it. So that it's making it difficult to defend himself. It's absolutely shocking what's going on at the minute.
Well, I mean, we used to pride ourselves in about Scots law and having our own legal system. But I think the Crown Office's action and the threats they are making to people, unreasonable threats, are actually tarnishing our reputation. And I think the Parliament has to bring the Crown Office to book. At the end of the day, we live in a democracy. And while I accept you have to have some constraints around legal advice that's going public for obvious reasons. In this particular case, the case for giving the legal advice that was promised to the committee, in my view, is overwhelming. And quite frankly, as long as they try to deny that paperwork to the committee, more and more people will repeat what Gordon Jackson said in his summing up at Alex Salmond's trial, that he can't put his finger on it, but something smells, is what he said. And, you know, that image, that feeling will be reinforced the more the Crown Office and the government resist doing what it said it would do and provide the committee with all the relevant paperwork that it requested.
It's taken an awful long time to get to the stage where there seems to be some form of agreement formed that they can have a look at certain redacted papers, but that doesn't go far enough, in my opinion.
No, they have to be given the papers. You know, the Parliament has given this committee a very clear remit, and the committee has outlined the paperwork it requires to see and to be able to make a judgment about in order to carry out its remit. The Parliament has voted twice for the legal advice to be made available to the committee. Yeah. So as far as, you know, the founding principles, 3 of the founding principles of the Parliament that we're all supposed to be signed up to are openness, transparency, and accountability. Every one of those principles is being breached by the denial of the paperwork to the committee. And that's why I abstained on the vote 2 or 3 weeks ago, much to the displeasure of the SNP whips. But I think there are fundamental principles about the Parliament that have to be protected, and openness, transparency, and accountability are top of the list.
So do you think that there's a likelihood that there might end up being a vote of confidence in the Lord Advocate shortly that will be reading about the papers?
Well, I mean, it's quite possible, you know, because the opposition parties appear to be united on the demand to see the legal advice. I don't think they will be satisfied just with being able to read the one particular document selected by the government. Apart from anything else, when the committee comes to write its report, it cannot quote from a document that it has seen secretly that it's not in the public domain. And therefore they cannot carry out the remit. They cannot fulfill the remit until they have that paperwork and it's out in the public domain and the subject of open discussion in the committee. So quite frankly, I think that this thing is going to end in tears if they don't get the paperwork that they are demanding, quite rightly in my view demanding, because I don't see how they can fulfill the remit without the evidence, without the paperwork.
Shall we move on, gentlemen, to what Dave calls the manifesto? Alec, you and Alex Salmond have put together a document which requires a fair amount of discussion and explanation, and I've already off record paid you compliment for producing it. It's starting to prepare us for post-COVID and a lot more, in my opinion. It's not just its skill shortages, it's others. I'd rather leave you, my friend, with the choice of which heading you would like to start on. Is it house building? Is it skills training? What would you pick as your top priority?
Well, let me start by saying why we did the paper, because obviously the main worry we have at the moment is the tail end. Well, it's not the tail end, it's second and maybe a third wave of COVID before we get enough people vaccinated to bring it under total control. So from COVID, there are 2 big consequences from COVID, apart from the obvious health consequences. One is the backlog in NHS procedures that are going to be built up as a result of COVID. And that will be a big challenge for governments, not just in Scotland or the UK, but across the world. And the second one is the economic fallout. And particularly when we get to the point where the delayed VAT payments have to be paid next year, and when businesses, you know, many of which will go under because they don't have enough money to keep them going because they've been closed down so many times because of COVID, A lot of businesses are going to go out of business. A lot of businesses have gone out of business. And with those businesses going out of business goes jobs. So we're going to have a massive headache in terms of the economic consequences, particularly in relation to high levels of unemployment. So Alec and I, both of us are trained economists. We feel very strongly that we need a plan in place and not wait till it happens, but actually kick off a plan now and try and build a consensus around the plan. And the essence of the plan, the core of the plan, is to, where we can, avoid people becoming unemployed, avoid business closures where we can, but recognize that a lot of it's going to be unavoidable. Therefore, we need to create work, we need to create jobs. And we have put forward a series of recommendations, all of which are designed to regenerate the economy, get economic recovery going, get economic sustainable expansion going, but use the opportunity for substantial investment in housing. We are desperately short of the number of houses we need in Scotland in all areas of all tenures. So let's have a very substantial additional house building programme. Let's have an investment in research and development to keep our scientists in Scotland and our research facilities in Scotland, because they are our future and they can provide a lot of very good high paid jobs. We have put very specific proposals in how to turn renewable energy into a huge long-term opportunity for Scotland, with a stake by the government in the renewable energy industry, that money that can be reinvested in other parts of the economy to grow the economy in future, and so on. So the purpose of these proposals is to deal with the immediate crisis that we face, but use it also as a platform for the longer term regeneration of the Scottish economy.
You also mentioned the skills gap. Can I, with Dave's agreement, tell you a wee story? Mrs. Thatcher was in power, 1986. I was running my own companies. I learned to program what back then was MS-DOS. Now, most people at that time were still using typewriters. Computers were not on people's desks. I trained, we had YTS, Youth Training Scheme. We brought them in, and I transformed my office from a paper-based office to a computerized office, networked.
Yeah.
By getting the younger people in who had no fear of computers. They scared of typewriters, but not computers. I had a lot of contacts at that time, so I then went to lawyers' offices, estate agents' offices, just pals of mine over lunch, and just said, how would you like to computerize your office? I've got someone highly trained on YTS at the moment, pay them a proper salary. I became known for doing that back then, Alec. And what then happened was I was in the House of Commons, literally speaking to Margaret Thatcher's parliamentary private secretary. Over the chat, that idea came up. Next thing, he put me in touch with the Manpower Services Commission. And suddenly we were creating newly skilled young people where the adults didn't have a clue about computerization.
Yeah.
I think you've mentioned skills. I think there's a way of redoing that whole enterprise where today it's the young people that have the skills and it's the older people that don't. So we maybe end up with, I'll just off the top of my head an idea. There's maybe a whole range of pensioners in Scotland, no access to the internet. So they're paying through the nose for gas and electricity because they don't know about how to switch. I've said to Dave before, I'd like to see a pilot of some kind come out of this where we just get a small group of people, identify where they can be of help, and see whether or not we can actually start using the skills that young people do have and transfer them to the older generation, the exact opposite of what I did in 86, because I think there's a gap in the market. A lot of people do not, above a certain age, a lot of people, silver surfers are great, but there's a lot of people do not know how to use a smartphone, how to go on and check out something. I'm hoping when we talk about skills and trying to do that, there are skills in the Yes movement all over. Alec, and I think we can draw on those skills and see whether or not things, and just use that as one small example of, could we do something of that nature?
Yeah. And I think another very good application for that pilot would be cybercrime, because an awful lot of older people are the subject of scams, and computers and telephones and all the rest of it are used to hoodwink them into declaring details of their bank accounts and all the rest of it to scammers who are out to rob these people of their, in some cases, life savings. Now, if they were able to be more computer literate and to be able to use a computer and also to try to recognize what's possibly a scam, because there are always telltale signs, not always, but very often, then that would help a lot of people not get into the situation where their savings have been taken out of their bank account and they're left with nothing. So I think that's a very good idea, Mike. I think that's something that people should pick up. So, but in the wider, if I can just, in terms of a paper, look at the wider picture. I mean, one of the areas where we have a dire shortage of skills is in IT amongst young people as well as the wider population. We produce every year, I think it's about 5,000 or 6,000 IT graduates. We need more than double that just to stand still because of the increasing demand for IT skills. So there's an opportunity. If we put the training places in situ, then another 7,000 or 8,000 people. They don't all need to be youngsters. They don't all need to be in their 20s. There are people in their 30s and 40s and even older could retrain and train to adapt to these skills. But if we're going to expand our IT facilities in every sphere of life as we are, and we're going to be able to do it effectively and locally, then we need to have many, many more people with IT, properly trained IT skills. And we've made that point in the paper. You're probably talking about the need for something like 7,000 or 8,000 additional IT training places in Scotland every year just to stand still. That's not including, you know, further investment in the IT sector, which is what we want to encourage. So my view is that's a sector of the economy where we're underperforming. We're doing a lot of good stuff in it, but in terms of scale, we're still underperforming, and a lot more people could be in good, well-paid jobs in IT.
Yep. When you say that, like we had Ian Lawson on a couple of weeks ago, who was basically there when Estonia left the Soviet Union, and they're now basically the top digital economy in Europe. Yep. And he was explaining how it all went and how easy it was. I mean, basically, you can do everything in the whole country for your computer, and it was some far out Valhalla what was possible. But the thing is, for where you're starting, we're starting in a sort of a dead world after COVID, where it's sort of Mad Max, if you like, and we'll have to rebuild from scratch. So rather than rebuild the things the way they were, which was really, really bad in a lot of things, let's start from scratch and build something good. And that's why when the minute we saw this, I was like, this is what we've been waiting for, because it covers so much. I mean, okay, when I first saw it, it was a page in the National, broken down into sections, but you could see instantly, like where it was economically viable, but two, where it would appeal to a populist people. I mean, it's something that everybody could buy into, be a part of, if you like. It's something we could all contribute to build it up.
Absolutely. I mean, it's fairly straightforward stuff, and you know, you could solve a number of problems all at once. If you take housing, you know, there's well over about 150,000 people in Scotland waiting for a council house on the waiting list. There's a lot of people who are not on the waiting list because they know it's a waste of time being on the waiting list because they'll never get a new house. there's a lot of people who would like to be on the housing ladder but can't get on it because they can't afford the money for a deposit. Well, if you had a national housing agency, one of the things it could do is help particularly young couples through, say, a rent to buy scheme, whereby for the first 5 years they pay a wee bit extra rent, and that accumulates into a deposit at the end of the 5 or 6 years, and they then have a deposit to buy either the house they're in or to buy another house, depending on what they want to do, because they can very often afford the mortgage. What they can't get together is the deposit. So there's loads of things we can be doing to improve the quality and standard of life for people, insulating their houses, retrofitting them in terms of new roofs. If you look at the tenements in Glasgow that need retrofitted in terms of, you know, heating systems, energy efficiency, new roofs, new everything almost, then there's a huge amount of work to be done. And of course, as you invest in that, that then has what's called the multiplier,
Yeah.
and it creates jobs in many other sectors. If you look, if people buying a new house need new carpets, new curtains, new equipment, a lot of that could be made in Scotland. So I think that's to me just a no-brainer, quite frankly. It's just common sense.
I gave you a wee warning, Alec, before we started recording that I would talk about pilots. Mr. Llewellyn and I came up with an idea. It's actually on one of the programs we did, and it's called The House That Yes Built.
Uh-huh.
And the idea was to find spare land somewhere. Ask our council, can we have that bit of land for a fair price or for nothing? Then ask people in the Yes movement to give us no more than £1 each. Dave did the figures on this. And the reason for doing that was to then build the type of house you're talking about, insulated, forward-looking, because it also reveals something. Number one, would anyone ever ask for their pound back? Okay.
Yep.
Big question. I wouldn't, ever.
No.
Two, you've created an entity which has a value. When you're talking about the multiplier, that can be borrowed against to build the second house.
Yeah.
And you can go on from there. So Dave and I we've been throwing this around forever. So your paper came out at the right time. I've now got 2 pilots that I've got in mind, one in IT and one the House That Yes built. And absolute dead serious. So Dave and I do a short program, 15 minutes max. And I think what we'll do, Dave, is we'll ask the Yes movement, would they contribute £1 so we can build the House That Yes built, and give you a pilot to start this all off, Alex?
That's a good idea, Mike. Very good idea. Excellent.
I'll thank Mr. Llewellyn for it, not me.
Right, will do.
But you see, the thing is, what I'm thinking here, we're sitting in post-industrial Scotland, right? There are brownfield sites all over the place that developers are sitting on. They're not using the land, they're sitting on it, and then they're getting away with the fact that they're saying, okay, you've got to build a certain percentage of these as affordable homes, and they're allowed to use that as student accommodation. Edinburgh is absolutely crippled with it. There are far too many student accommodation and not enough affordable homes for ordinary people, simply because they've got this loophole in the law. And as I say, they could force the developers to sell up these sites. I mean, brownfield sites, they don't cost a lot. And if you've got the people who can build on them, you've got the people who can clean them.
One of the other consequences of coronavirus is I think you'll start to see a lot of people now spending, once the coronavirus is over, and they go back to work, I think a lot more people, office workers, will now spend a proportion of their week working from home. They may well go into the office 1 or 2 days a week, but I don't think they'll go in 5 days a week every week. And I think what you're going to see, particularly in our city centres, is a lot of office space becoming available because there's no longer the need for as much office space because people are working more and more from home. And that office space in city centres, a lot of it would be quite easily converted into housing. And maybe that's an area for another pilot. to pick a city centre in Scotland, identify where, you know, there's office space becomes available that's suitable for conversion to housing, and bring people back into town centres and city centres to live as part of the general strategy for regenerating our town centres and our city centres. And I think that's another example of where things are about to change as a result of coronavirus, and we should turn what is a potential minus into a plus by converting this empty office space into houses.
I take you forward into the energy sector and your thoughts on that, Alec. It strikes, we've all learned what happened with oil.
Yeah, well, precisely, and the point we make is we don't want the same thing happening with renewable energy. The first thing to say is that Scotland has got massive resources, massive potential for renewable energy. I mean, we're already well ahead of the game in terms of wind power onshore. I think the potential for wind power offshore in Scotland is absolutely huge. Even I know that you might not believe this, but the EU once designated Scotland as one of the best places for solar energy, because it goes by the hours of daylight and various technical things I don't know anything about. And there are many other sources of renewable energy as well. So what we're suggesting is that we should do what was originally intended by the Labour government way back in the 70s, when they set up the British National Oil Corporation, when North Sea oil was starting to flow substantially. And the whole point was to follow, well, it was actually predating the Norwegian example, whereby the state took a stake in the oil companies. So as well as getting the tax revenue, you get the return from being a major shareholder in the business. So what we're suggesting is we should learn the lesson and we should become a stakeholder, not having to pay for it. It's part of the deal to get planning permission and licensing. And the state should hold a minority stake in the big wind farms that are still to be developed, and use the dividend from that to go into what we have called the Scottish Pension Fund, not so much to pay pensions, but actually to fund other investment that's needed resulting from the demands of an aging population and climate change and all the rest of it. So we're saying this is the second chance. Oil was the first chance, and that's now largely, you know, there's still a lot of oil left, but, you know, it's going to have a finite life, whether it's 30 years or 40 years, whereas renewable energy doesn't have a finite life. It will go on ad infinitum. And if we build up a substantial investment portfolio in renewable energy, in future years, we'll be able to use the dividend from that to reinvest in new industries and make sure that the young people of tomorrow get jobs that are fit for purpose and which can give them a good standard of living in Scotland in the late 21st century and beyond.
You'll know, Alec, the lady that I think is on the government's economic advisory panel, a lady called Mariana Mazzucato.
Yeah.
Economist.
Yeah.
And that is what her central theme is in all of these things. She looked at all the companies, whether it was Microsoft, Google, and she recognized that every single one of them, in one way, shape, or other, had been started with government money, with state involvement.
Yeah, and research and development.
Yeah, but the state didn't stay involved.
Exactly. I think it was a book called The Entrepreneurial Spirit, wasn't it?
That's correct.
Aye.
That's correct.
Yeah,
and I've followed her, and it just, we have tended to always get into this, the private sector or the nationalised sector.
Yeah.
It just strikes me, if government's putting money into something, it should have a stake.
Well, the irony is the UK government's doing exactly that, because what they're doing now, because they're now talking about taking equity holdings in companies as part of the plan to help companies recover from COVID.
Yeah.
And I mean, other countries do this on a regular basis. Germany does it on a regular basis. France does it on a regular basis. And everybody wins, because it means that the state has a vested interest in the success of these businesses. But the businesses are still predominantly privately owned, but they've got a social responsibility. And the part of that social responsibility is giving a dividend back to the state on a regular basis that the state can then reinvest in improving the quality of life for everybody.
It didn't work out very well with the Bank of Scotland.
No, well, of course, the purpose of that, the money invested in the Royal Bank, particularly, and with the Bank of Scotland, that was a rescue. I think Gordon Brown made a mistake. I think he should just have nationalised those banks at that time, because quite frankly, what has happened since has not been the best answer to what was needed to be done after the recession caused by the financial crisis. I think he'd been better just nationalising them outright. Even if eventually he wanted to re-privatise them, I think life would have been a lot easier for everybody if he just nationalised. I mean, if you go to France and again in Germany, most of the banks are owned at local or state level, or even at national level. A lot of the banks have certainly got big government ownership shares in them, or in some cases just outright. In Germany, in the Länder, every Länder, I think, or nearly every Länder owns a bank.
It's something I brought up in one of the programs we did, is that if you're a person who's finding it hard to survive at all, or if you're lucky enough your pay just about lasts till the next payday, you don't need to be with a commercial bank who are seeking profit. You need a payment system and a place to put it. And at the moment, we've so organised that if you are on universal credit, it goes into a commercial bank. And this is a thing I've spoken a lot about, but just very briefly, as soon as it does so, every single penny that ever goes near a commercial bank becomes the bank's money. And that is the legal position. And I keep saying to myself, that should never be the legal position. If it's your money, it should remain your money. And Germany's the perfect example of that.
Well, you and I and Dave are young enough to remember the Gyro Bank, which was an offshoot of the post office set up by Tony Benn, I think it was. And that was developing into a people's bank. And it performed the kind of function that you're talking about and was wholly owned by the UK government. And unfortunately, the Tories abolished it. And I think that was very short-sighted. I think the clever thing for the Tories to have done was to allow it to develop, because it was a very popular mechanism, particularly for poorer people, to manage their money. And I think some of the poverty that's caused because people are having to revert to loan sharks and the like, a lot of that might have been avoided had the Gyro Bank still be operating today.
Yep, couldn't agree with you more. It's to do with the dominance. That's where I spent my life, was in the finance sector. And an awful lot of what happened was totally driven. I mean, the program that lasted, I pinpointed 1986 and what was called the financial Big Bang, and all the rule books were thrown out. Gordon Brown has sorry, I've forgotten his name now. Lawson, the Chancellor at that time, said we didn't realise what we were doing, but that's what caused the 2008 crash. Gordon Brown then went on to talk about the financial regulation. He thought we looked at each individual organisation, but we didn't realise they'd all spent each other's money, got derivatives all over the place. We can learn from all of that. And I was talking earlier on, sorry, I'm going to go off at a slight tangent for 2 seconds, talking earlier on about being prepared. At the moment, I get emails from the Financial Conduct Authority. I get them from the Financial Ombudsman Service. I get them from the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, which played a big part when the banks went wrong. I also get them from the Bank of England. We have a major problem in Scotland preparing for the days when we have to look at regulation, and we're not looking at it hard enough. None of those organisations are paid for by the government. They are all paid for by the industry itself, which means they're basically paid by Canary Wharf. It's the big boys that sustain those. We already know that Royal Bank have said, we'll move our registered office. We know Standard Life in 2014 said the same thing. So we do not have the size. We have a lot of finance going on, but we don't have the size to pay for these things. And we've got to think our way through that. And there's a second part to that. If we decide to join Europe, you'll see an influx. It's what's happening in Ireland. You'll see an influx of financial companies coming back into Scotland. Barclays have a big headquarters being built in Glasgow at the moment. They'll seize that opportunity. At that stage, we don't have the expertise in financial regulation that we need. We don't have the body of knowledge that will be able to see us through that. And if you look at the stuff that comes out from these organizations, and I stress I get them every day, some of the stuff they're having to deal with in terms of looking where money is going, looking where money is coming from, we have got to prepare for that. We can't just say independence and that's it solved. Sorry, Alec,
Well, absolutely. And if you look at, I mean, the two very good examples to learn from are Iceland and Canada. Now, Iceland has got a population, I think, of about 400,000 people. They suffered very badly in the financial crash, but they jailed some of the bankers, deservedly so, and they've completely rebuilt their financial system, and they've completely rebuilt their whole economy, and they've now got a far higher standard of living per head than we do in the United Kingdom. So we should look to the likes of Iceland to see where a very small country brought the financial systems into, you know, a proper system of regulation. And one of the best systems of regulation in the whole world is Canada, which also has got a brilliant superannuation and pension set up as well. But we could learn a lot from Canada, and it's a great pity that Gordon Brown didn't learn from Canada. And instead of deregulating the city, he should have better regulated the city. And had he done so, like Canada, we would not have suffered anything like what we did as a result of the financial crash in 2008.
Absolutely.
You had Clinton deregulating in the States, undoing the work of Franklin Roosevelt, and you had Brown and Blair doing the same here, and that was a major contributing factor to the crash. We would, if we'd had a Canadian-style system of regulation of the banks and the pension companies and all the rest of it, we would not have suffered to anything like the extent we did during that particular scenario.
See, my hope is we have an opportunity in Scotland at the moment to start digging into these things. I don't see them talked about a lot, Alec.
No, they're not.
I think there's an opportunity for us to dig into it. And these, you've taken the words out of my mouth. Let's go over to Iceland and say, how did you get yourself sorted out?
Absolutely.
And literally just copy it and say, right, okay, if that applies to 400,000 people here, it can apply to 5 million a year. We need to be doing things like that in my position. It's not sufficient to wait till a transition period and say we better get our heads around these things.
Another example of Iceland. Iceland has its own national airline. You know, and if Scotland had its own national airline, we could be, you know, leading the way in sustainable air travel, which is the next exciting development in the aviation industry. And we could be doing, I mean, if you're independent, you can do things you can't do when you're just devolved. And Iceland's a very good example of what you can do if you've got an innovative government and an innovative nation.
Dave, jump in and whenever you want, but I'm going to finish in one other thing, if I may. My final thought. There is a suggestion that we call this the Scottish. I warned you I would do this. This is one of the curveballs, Alec. We're going to call it the Scottish National Renewable Corporation.
Right.
Please don't. Please don't.
What do you want to call it?
Well, I'll tell you. The defining moment in Scottish history at the moment comes from two words. One word is yes, the other word is no. You'll know the song which says accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative, and don't mess with Mr. In Between. That title is messing with Mr. In Between. You have to inspire this country. Scotland has to become the country that says yes.
Absolutely.
Have yes embodied in everything you create. Don't make it a stale SNHRC. Have it called whatever you like, but it has to be part of a yes brand. Internationally, Scotland is well recognised. Yeah. We get our independence, we become the country that says yes.
I'm sure they'll take. I wouldn't be the one be taking the decision, Mike, but I'm sure that's a point they can.
Well, I'm going to fight it every single way.
Right.
Historians will look back, Alec. They will look back on this period and they'll see
Yeah.
what happened in Scotland. And
Yeah.
it is, you're either yes for independence or no for the Union.
Yeah,
Yes is going to win this battle. And
absolutely.
we've got to be known for that.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry, that's me.
I agree with your
That's my
fundamental
curveball.
Good.
So Alec, you got an award this week from the Herald. The name cannot be mentioned. Along with another gentleman who we've been speaking about rather a lot the night for some reason, seeing as they wheeled him out his crypt last week. How do you feel about finally getting this coveted award in the year that you're going to be leaving Parliament?
Well, I was absolutely totally surprised. I didn't even know I'd been nominated. It's an award, I think it's called the best ever debater to date in the Scottish Parliament over the last 22 years. Now, I mean, obviously in the Parliament, there are some and have been some excellent debaters. Margot MacDonald, David McCletchy, Alex Salmond, you know, you could name a lot of people who are very, very good debaters. So to be considered along with them and end up getting this award was a real pleasure and it was an honour. You know, I wasn't expecting it, but it's nice to have. My son texted me to say, how is it you can win the debates in the Parliament but no at home, you know?
Join the club.
Which my wife thought was very funny, by the way. But it was very nice, and you know, it's a nice honour to come, and I really do appreciate it. I'm not sure I merit it, but I do appreciate it.
Well, seeing as you're going to be finding yourself at a loose end in May, do you think you'll be up and out with the yes movement and
absolutely. I mean, you know, the key thing for me, I think we've got a window of opportunity. I think the election next year is going to be absolutely vital. It's going to be very important to get a mandate for independence, or independence, a referendum out of that election. And therefore, you know, for my money, independence has to be the name of the game. And you know, people will say to me, well, is it the right time given the coronavirus won't be completely over? The whole point, and this is what really the fundamental argument in our paper was, is if we have the powers of being independent, our ability to recover economically from coronavirus will be substantially enhanced, because some of the things, particularly say around energy policy, we could do a lot more. I mean, our paper was about using the powers we've got. But if we had the powers of an independent country, there is much more we could do. If you take the BIFAB situation, for example, if we were in control of all the licensing, if we were in control of all the taxation, which we're clearly not, then our ability to make sure that we can use the second wave, the second chance of renewable energy as part of the rebuilding block for a new Scotland, we can do that easily with independence. It's very much more difficult to do it without independence. And I could give you hundreds of examples of where it would be much easier to recover long-term from COVID economically, where we are an independent country. So my view is that within the next few years, we've got to become an independent, free country, but we've got to win the argument. I don't think we can assume that victory is in the bag. I know we've had good opinion poll results. There's been 17 or 18 opinion polls now showing majority support for independence. But we know from the long fight to get into power in the Scottish Parliament that you can't take anything for granted. So what we've got to do is prepare the case, because it's a different set of circumstances from what we had in 2014. So we need an updated case. We need a clear answer on the currency, policy on the currency. We need a clear stance on the myths around the deficit and we couldn't pay our way. We need to get pensioners, many more pensioners to vote for independence this time. So we need a very clear plan and strategy because it's not enough just to go out and shout for independence. We've got to work for it. We've got to persuade people. We've got to earn it. And I believe we'll never get an opportunity like the one we have in the next 2 or 3 years. And let's get out there and deliver independence for the people of Scotland.
I agree more, Alec. One of the reasons I've suggested pilots is we had Dot Jessamine on, and she referred back to a comment that Alex Salmon had made, is you can't tell people, you have to show them.
Exactly.
And I think the Yes movement is fully prepared to do the things that are necessary to show what an independent Scotland could be.
Yeah. And part of that is, in the meantime, making more imaginative use of the powers we've got in areas like, you know, the renewable energy sector, in areas like that outlined in our paper for massive investment in housing and life sciences and the like. And then we have to say to people, this is what we can do with the limited powers we've got. Think what we could do if with the powers of a fully independent country. And that, I think, has to be the message.
Dave, how are we doing?
I think we're just hitting the hour just now. But I'm not letting them go away. I'm not letting them go away without this. Alec, you don't believe in the European Union. Now, I lived in Belgium for 25 years. I was there when it changed to the euro. Basically, I still think Antwerp is my home. My kids are all foreign, or most of them are foreign born. My wife's Polish. I've had to register my wife this week with the government registration scheme, which basically means she's a choice of getting kicked out the country at the end of this year, or wearing one of these little no Star of David, but this little blue flag with the stars on it that makes her a second-class citizen. I feel myself Scottish and European. I never feel British. But the thing is, it's like, I know you've got different ideas in Europe. You said you would educate me. You've got 5 minutes.
Well, I mean, I feel I'm a European as well, but being a European and wanting us to remain in the EU are two different things. And I don't understand the argument that you don't want London to rule Scotland, but you're happy for Brussels to rule Scotland. The fact of life is that the agenda in Brussels is to turn the European Union, and they're well down the road on this, into a kind of federal state. And I don't want to come out, stop being a province of the UK, and then start becoming a province of the European Union. My view is that Scotland's future would be far better if an independent Scotland joined EFTA, the European Free Trade Association, and that gives you many of the benefits of being in the EU, primarily in relation to free trade, without a lot of the downsides. And particularly if you look at the developments inside the EU, I mean, do you really want a right-wing government that exists in Hungary or in Poland, and the kind of, you know, very dodgy policies these people are pursuing? Do you really want to be part and parcel of that? Do you want them taking decisions about your country? I don't.
I'm on your side. I come at it for a different reason. We're going to get an independence vote, the majority vote, yes. We're then going to get into the most hellish transition period with the rest of the UK. That is going to be an absolute nightmare, not least because the only civil servants we would have at that point are all paid by our UK. We've got to think our way through that.
Yeah.
I do it from the point of view of being comfortable. If we're going to go through a real difficult transition period with a lot of hard bargaining to be done, coming out of that, no matter how welcoming the EU might be, no matter whether there's positives and negatives, I think we'd just be more comfortable in a group which has got Iceland, which has got Norway, which has got Switzerland, which has got Liechtenstein. I don't think we'd lose anything if that was the first step. We can take a longer view on the EU if that is the only step we take at that time. That's always been my view.
So there you are, Dave, you're educated.
Right, okay, right. let me say one more thing on it then. It's I could be persuaded by EFTA because it's the social thing that about Europe that I like. It's about being able to travel without borders. It's about being able to talk different languages with different people. I mean, I speak 3 languages. It's like it's something, and it breaks down barriers. And I find myself much more in common with people in Belgium when you're talking about foreigners putting right-wing policies.
Look, I'm not going to defend many aspects of the Tory Brexit. I voted for Brexit in principle because for the reason I've outlined. But I think the way it's been handled by the Tories under Theresa May and under Boris Johnson has been abysmal. I mean, I don't know why from day one we didn't say and give a guarantee, even if the other side hesitated. We should have given a guarantee in day one that every European person, everybody from the EU who had settled in the UK and wanted to stay here would be guaranteed the right to do so. We shouldn't have never hesitated in that. You know, that was crazy. And some of the stuff now, I think some aspects of the negotiations leave a lot to be desired. But, you know, what we were asked to vote for was in the principle, do you want to stay in the European Union? And my answer was, no, I didn't. I think there are better alternatives.
Okay, I'm biting my tongue here. I'm not going to put it on the recorded, but I'm going to have a word with you after we stop recording. It's been great having you on, Alex. Thanks very much for coming on.
A pleasure.
We hoped we'd be able to get a wee bit more flesh on the bones of what was happening, and I hope that you can actually find a vehicle in making it happen. But I tell you what, I am sure if you weaponise the Yes movement, they would love to get involved.
Absolutely, absolutely. Good.
Alex, thanks very, very much. I hope you've enjoyed it.
I have indeed. Thanks very much indeed. Cheers.
Yeah, hopefully you'll come along again sometime.
Absolutely. Cheers. Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.